You're on the train headed home, and it's a very erotic scene. And
well, it's not. That's very funny because sex on the train? There is no sex on the train.
There are some faces in Hollywood that just feel like they've always been there, woven right into the fabric of cinema. Diane Lane is absolutely one of them. From the moment she first appeared on screen, you could see a depth in her eyes, a quiet soulfulness that felt way beyond her years. She was a prodigy, the it girl, the fresh face on the cover of Time magazine at just 14 years old, celebrated as Hollywood's next huge star. But Diane Lane's story isn't some simple Hollywood fairy tale. It's really a story of survival. It's the story of a girl who basically had to raise herself, a woman who navigated the brutal worlds of fame, heartbreak, and even being cast aside by the industry. This is the story of the crushing lows that came after the incredible highs, the private struggles that nearly broke her, and the quiet, fierce resilience that has defined one of Hollywood's most lasting, and maybe most misunderstood, stars. What really happened to Diane Lane is so much more complicated and heartbreaking than the polished image we see on screen. Before she even turned 18, Diane Lane had lived more lives than most people do in their entire existence. She was born in New York City in 1965, into a world that was broken from the start. Her mom was a nightclub singer and a one-time Playboy playmate, and her dad was an acting coach who also drove a cab to pay the bills. They split up just 13 days after she was born. That first break set the tone for a childhood that was anything but stable, a chaotic whirlwind of living in different hotels and a nasty custody battle that ended with her being kidnapped by her own mother. This wasn't a childhood, it was a brutal training ground for a life that was going to demand every last bit of her strength. From the outside, Diane Lane's start in acting looked like a total dream. While other kids were in class, Lane was performing in experimental theater. She kicked off her professional career at the shockingly young age of 6 at New York's famous La Mama Experimental Theater Club. By 12, she was on stage with Meryl Streep in a production of The Cherry Orchard. This wasn't some kid with a cute hobby, this was a massive talent being forged in the heart of the avant-garde. Her father, Burton Lane, was her guide, an acting coach who dropped her right into a world of artists and dreamers. She spent her youth living with him in a string of residential hotels across New York, sometimes even riding along in his taxi while he worked. It was a bohemian, unsteady, and lonely life that made her grow up way too fast. She later said she felt like an adult hiding in this little 8-year-old body. Her huge break on the big screen came in 1979 when she was 13, in the movie A Little Romance. Acting opposite the legendary Sir Laurence Olivier, she gave a performance that was just stunning in its maturity. The world was hooked, instantly. Time magazine slapped her on its cover, calling her one of Hollywood's whiz kids. Olivier himself called her the new Grace Kelly, and director Francis Ford Coppola, who would soon cast her in 2 of his own movies, said she was his favorite actress. At just 14, Diane Lane was a household name, and by 18, a millionaire. It was a dizzying, skyrocketing rise that seemed to promise everything. But in Hollywood, the higher you fly, the harder you fall. And for Diane, that fall was coming a lot sooner than anyone thought. That same independence her chaotic childhood forced on her turned into a double-edged sword in the high-stakes world of Hollywood. At 15, in a bold move to get some control over her own life, Lane declared herself emancipated from her father. She took off to Los Angeles for a week with her friend, actor Christopher Atkins, something she later called reckless behavior that comes from having too much independence too young. This wasn't just random rebellion, it was a desperate attempt to feel normal in a life that had been anything but. Her return to New York was followed by one of the most traumatic moments of her life. Her mother, who had been mostly out of the picture, suddenly showed up and kidnapped her, taking her to Georgia. A painful legal fight followed, and after 6 weeks, Lane was finally allowed to go back to her dad's care in New York. For the next 3 years, she didn't speak a word to her mother, a silence that came from a deep and painful place of betrayal. Professionally, she was hitting a wall. After working with the legendary Francis Ford Coppola on both The Outsiders and Rumble Fish, she landed starring roles in two huge studio movies in 1984, Streets of Fire and The Cotton Club. She'd actually turned down future blockbusters Splash and Risky Business for these parts. But both movies flopped, becoming commercial and critical letdowns. In an industry that's known for being brutal, 2 flops in a row was enough to slam the brakes on a career that had seemed unstoppable. Hollywood, the town that had just crowned her its new queen, was starting to lose interest. The industry that built her up started to push her away, not just because of box office numbers, but because she refused to play the Hollywood game. She wouldn't fit into the perfect, polished image of a starlet. The pressure was enormous, and at just 19 years old, Diane Lane did the unthinkable. She walked away. She went into a self-imposed semi-retirement, moving to Georgia to live with her mother, who she had finally reconciled with. She later said of that time, "My career ended and I started." It was a heavy statement from a young woman who'd been a performer her whole life but was only just starting to figure out who she really was. Stepping away from Hollywood wasn't the end, it was a much-needed reset. It was a time for healing and figuring things out. Lane spent time out of the spotlight, reconnecting with her mom and finding a sense of stability that she'd never really had. When she came back to acting, she did it with a new maturity and a much more selective approach. She took roles on TV, most famously in the 1989 miniseries Lonesome Dove, which got her an Emmy nomination and reminded everyone of the incredible talent she had. Through the 90s, she worked consistently, mostly in independent films that let her dig into more complicated characters. A role in the 1999 film A Walk on the Moon showcased her as a woman struggling with desire and her own identity, earning her an Independent Spirit Award nomination and signaling a new chapter in her career. She was perfecting the art of showing deep, internal struggles with a quiet power, often saying more with a single look than a whole page of dialogue ever could. But her real comeback, the one that would completely redefine her place in Hollywood, happened in 2002 with the thriller Unfaithful. In the movie, she played Connie Sumner, a suburban wife and mother who dives into a passionate, destructive affair. It was a risky, raw, and deeply human performance. Lane showed the complicated mix of guilt, desire, and self-destruction with a brutal honesty that was both scary and captivating. One of the film's most famous scenes, where her character is on a train processing what she's just done, was mostly improvised. It was pure, unfiltered emotion, caught in a single take that became legendary. The performance was a total game-changer. It earned her nominations for an Academy Award, a Golden Globe, and a Screen Actors Guild Award. Suddenly, Diane Lane wasn't the forgotten prodigy anymore. She was a powerhouse, a respected actress at the top of her game. She followed that triumph with the 2003 rom-com Under the Tuscan Sun, playing a writer reeling from a divorce who buys a villa in Italy on a whim to start over. The film really connected with audiences, especially women who saw their own stories of heartbreak and renewal in her character's journey. Lane poured her own emotional truth into the role, admitting she was often homesick and drained during filming, a vulnerability that just made her performance feel even more real. With these two films, Diane Lane didn't just rebuild her career, she transformed it, proving she was a survivor with a talent too powerful to be ignored. While her career was hitting incredible new highs, her personal life was still a place of struggle and quiet heartbreak. Lane has been married twice, first to French actor Christopher Lambert and then to actor Josh Brolin. She met Lambert in Paris in 1984, and after a whirlwind romance, they married in 1988. They had a daughter, Eleanor, but the pressure of having two demanding, international careers took its toll. They divorced in 1994, but they stayed friends and committed to co-parenting their daughter. Her second marriage, to Josh Brolin, was much more turbulent and very public. They got engaged in 2003 and married in August 2004. On the surface, they looked like a Hollywood power couple, two talented actors who got the pressures of the business. But just 4 months into the marriage, the fairy tale image shattered. In December 2004, after a bad argument at their home, Lane called the police, and Brolin was arrested on a misdemeanor charge of domestic battery. The headlines were instant and shocking. A spokesperson for the couple quickly tried to downplay it, calling the incident a misunderstanding, and Lane chose not to press charges. But the damage was done. Friends have said the incident deeply hurt Lane and made her retreat even more from the public eye. The couple stayed together for almost another decade, putting on a united front for the cameras. But behind the scenes, the relationship was reportedly full of strain. Brolin later admitted to his own struggles and acknowledged he wasn't mature enough to handle their relationship back then. Those who knew Lane could see the emotional toll it was taking on her. Finally, after years of quiet struggle, Diane Lane filed for divorce in February 2013, citing irreconcilable differences. The split itself was handled amicably, with no public drama or nasty legal fights. Just like she'd done so many times before when facing pain, Lane chose dignity and silence over a public spectacle. She never played the victim, but quietly walking away was a powerful act of self-preservation. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was her armor, a way to protect a part of herself that had already been through way too much public scrutiny. Diane Lane's journey is a powerful reminder that resilience isn't always about loud defiance, sometimes it's about quiet strength. Her ability to handle both professional and personal storms with so much grace is a true testament to her character. What's your favorite Diane Lane performance? Do you think she's one of the most underrated actresses of her generation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which of her roles you connected with the most. The word exile might sound a little dramatic, but for Diane Lane, those periods in her career when Hollywood seemed to turn its back on her were very real. After the box office bombs of the mid-80s, it wasn't just that she was getting fewer offers, she was actively being sidelined for not conforming. The industry wanted a specific type of star, and Lane, with her fierce independence and quiet intensity, just didn't fit their mold. So, instead of fighting for a spot in a system that didn't get her, she chose to step back and define success for herself. This cycle of retreating and returning pretty much became the signature of her career. Each time she came back, she did it with more depth and a stronger sense of who she was. Her comeback in the late 80s and 90s was built on powerful character work in projects like Lonesome Dove. Her incredible return in the early 2000s with Unfaithful and Under the Tuscan Sun was a masterclass in how to reinvent your career after 40, an age when Hollywood often writes off its leading ladies. This resilience is maybe her most defining feature. She has weathered a traumatic childhood, the chaos of fame, major career setbacks, and public heartbreak with a steady, unwavering dignity. She learned very early to separate who she was from the characters she played, creating a protective wall that allowed her to survive the industry's madness. While other stars might have run to the media to fight their battles, Lane chose privacy. This silence has often been misunderstood, but for her, it's been a source of incredible power, a refusal to let headlines or heartbreak define her story. In recent years, she's continued to work with a quiet consistency, taking on roles that genuinely interest her, from playing Martha Kent in the DC Universe to her acclaimed role as the socialite Slim Keith in Feud, Capote vs. The Swan Star. She has embraced getting older with a grace that's pretty rare in Hollywood, picking roles that reflect where she is in life instead of chasing some impossible idea of eternal youth. Her journey is proof that a career doesn't have to be a straight line up. It can be a series of reinventions, a process of falling down and getting back up, each time a little stronger and a whole lot wiser. In the end, Diane Lane's story isn't a tragedy. It's a profound story of survival. It's about a little girl who grew up in the whirlwind of New York's theater scene and had to become an adult way before her time. It's about a teenage star who was crowned Hollywood royalty, only to be tossed aside when she refused to play by their rules. It's about a woman who went through public heartbreak and immense private pain, but absolutely refused to be broken by it. Her life has been a quiet act of rebellion against the very idea of fame. In an industry that demands you share everything, she chose privacy. In a world that feeds on drama, she chose silence. Through it all, she's built a career on integrity and incredible talent, earning the deep respect of her peers and audiences. Diane Lane's legacy isn't just in the unforgettable characters she's played on screen, but in the quiet strength she has shown off-screen. She is a symbol of resilience, a woman who faced down heartbreak and exile, and came out on the other side not just in one piece, but completely transformed. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the greatest strength isn't found in the spotlight, but in the quiet, stubborn refusal to let anyone else tell you who you are.